Hey everybody, my name is Wolfe, and thanks for coming out and listening to me talk about record keeping today. It's an exciting subject. Just to give you an idea about my background is I started off, I kind of cut my teeth in this industry on the workers' comp side. So workers' comp clinics, and we did everything from pre-employment physicals and drug screens and things like that to case management and actually having contract nurses in plants and things like that. And so during that time, I got to see a lot of different industries, everything from sausage factory to somebody that made like high-end airplane parts. So I've been in a lot of different places and seen different things, and they would always call our clinic, and ask us, is this recordable or not? And also, being the healthcare provider, what we decided to do in the clinic could cause something to become recordable by OSHA standards, because by OSHA standards, if you do something that's considered recordable, you can't take it back. Once it's done, it's kind of a recordable at that point. You can't say, whoa, we want to do it and do over. And so we worked with our clients through the process to manage their workers' comp and to help them with record keeping. And I want to make sure that everybody understands that workers' comp and record keeping, they're two different animals. They're really connected together, but they don't have the same rules. And so I'm going to cover a lot of the basics today with record keeping, but you're going to hear me talk about workers' comp. And because there's different rules, I want to share with you some of the stuff that I learned over the years. My current job right now is I work for the Nantahala Outdoor Center. So I kind of left the corporate environment and went to the outdoor industry. And for those of you who don't know, we run rafting and zip lining. We are in 4 different states on 6 different rivers. During the summer, we ramp up to about 800 employees during peak season. And then we go back down to around 100 employees. And we have tons of turnover, right? Because we hire a lot of people who are younger. They're looking for fun work to do during the summer. And so we have to do a lot of retraining and stuff as new staff comes back in. And if you think about my current job, do you think I have a lot of incidents and records to keep up with? Absolutely. There's inherent risk. What's different about this industry is there's inherent risk in the outdoors that we can't engineer out of the program. We can't control weather. We can write policies and programs to try to prevent things, but a raft guide slipping on a rock, am I ever going to be able to stop that from happening? No, they have to be able to launch rafts and perform rescues and things like that. So we see probably a lot more incidents come across my desk than in a typical factory setting or something. Hopefully, a lot more than what y'all are probably seeing per number of employees that you have. So I'm just going to jump right into it. So why is record keeping so important? A lot of people think of it as compliance, and that's true. It is important because we have to keep records and we have to comply with OSHA regulations because there's penalties involved with that. We have to provide public access to workplace safety information, and then OSHA on the back end keeps up with all the statistics. That's how they decide, what their IPSIS programs are going to be, is they look at all those records, and that's how they also decide what industries they're going to put more standards around record keeping on, because there's a list of industries that don't have to comply with record keeping. And then really, what I would encourage most people to do is look at it through a different lens. And it's really looking at using this data to reduce incidents and ultimately reduce your costs. And that cost could be in the form of your insurance premiums, but also it's morale for your workforce. It's all kinds of other things associated with that. And what I would encourage you to do is look at OSHA, what OSHA requires, and absolutely put that on OSHA 300 logs, but also look at all the other incidents that are happening that aren't considered recordable, and really doing a great job of documenting those incidents and doing incident investigations so that you can improve your safety in general, regardless of whether it's recordable or not. And identifying, reducing hazards, and then taking proactive measures. So let's just talk real quick about definitions. So there's this thing called a reportable, and we're going to get into detail about that. And so what this means is if there's a certain incident that happens, according to the OSHA definition, you have to self-report it. And that's different for every state. And we're going to, that have state plans. So we're going to talk about that. And then if you're under a federal program, then you have to report it to federal. Recordable. So this means that there's very, very specific language under what's considered a first aid and what's not considered a first aid. And if you don't fall under that first aid, chances are it's recordable. And that means that there's certain requirements that you have. You have to fill out forms. You've got to fill out some forms within 7 days. Other ones you have to report at the end of the year. And then you have to post that for the employees and staff to be able to see those. And so we're going to talk in detail about that. And that's really what most of the presentation is about. And then we have first aids. So first aids are those things that incidents that happen. And it's a very, again, OSHA has a very tight definition of a first aid. I want to make it clear that has nothing to do with what's considered a first aid from a workers' comp standpoint. Or, so I'm an advanced TMT, and I've done medical training, a lot of medical training for folks, all the way first responders, CPR, first aid training. And what we would consider first aid from a medical standpoint, no, that's a different definition from what OSHA has. So if you remember anything from this presentation, remember this one thing, is that whatever's on that, whatever OSHA considers a first aid, that's it. And it's very literal. If it doesn't say it in the OSHA regs under first aid, then it's not first aid, okay? It doesn't matter if you have a medical background and you think of first aid as one thing, or you take a first aid CPR class, and in class they call it something first aid. Get that definition out of your mind for record keeping. It is exactly what OSHA has word for word in their standard. And then near misses. How many people in here collect near misses? How many people think, so I don't know for y'all, but for my company, do you think I have more near miss reports at the end of the year or more incident reports? More incident reports. Why? Don't report them. So I think we all have this huge opportunity to really dig into near misses and get more people and try to encourage more near misses, because that's how you're going to stop the recordables, right? Is if something happens multiple times, then the next time it happens, it could be a recordable. And so we have a huge effort in our company to try to incentivize folks to report on near misses, and we're starting to see our near miss documents go up. So being proactive, like on the last slide, I would really encourage people to work on your near misses. So let's get into reportable. So this is the one where something bad has happened. You've got to call OSHA and tell them something bad happened, okay? So work-related fatalities, you have 8 hours to report that. And there was an incident that happened on the river, one of the rivers we work on this year. It was a swiftwater rescue instructor. So they were teaching a class. They were teaching a bunch of firefighters and rescue people. And she passed away during the class, one of the instructors did. And I got a call from OSHA because the person hadn't reported it. It ended up being a South Carolina company. And I had to help them try to track down the company that had the fatality. And something really clear is it doesn't matter if you're on that exempt list, that you don't have to turn in your OSHA 300 logs. It doesn't matter if you have under 10 employees, you fall under this. Every company falls under this. So that person only had like 5 employees, and so they really didn't keep up with a lot of OSHA regulations and things like that, and they were unaware that they had to call and self-report. So that is a requirement. You have to self-report. If it requires inpatient hospitalization this is important, for care and treatment, okay? For care and treatment. And if that happens within, you're supposed to do that within 24 hours. And we're getting into a little bit more of the detail. But if you get admitted into the hospital for observation, that doesn't count. OSHA is very literal in the wording. Care and treatment. So observation, no. Care and treatment, absolutely. All work-related amputations. So does anybody know how OSHA defines amputation? Like, is it like a whole finger gone? That's an amputation, right? Yeah. What about if just the tip of my finger gets cut off? Still amputation. Absolutely. It doesn't have to be bone. It's any part of the body that is now not attached. And so you have to report that within 24 hours. That's probably, I would say, is what OSHA is getting the most calls for in this category. And they have a special emphasis program on amputation, as a matter of fact. Work-related loss of an eye. So this is a weird one. Does anybody know what the OSHA definition for loss of an eye is? It means that you lost the eyeball. It doesn't mean that you lost your vision. Okay? So they're talking about an evisceration would be considered a loss of an eye. So again, you have 24 hours to report that. And then who must report? All employers have to report. It doesn't matter if you're on the exempt list for record keeping. It doesn't matter if you have under 10 employees, you're supposed to report those things. How do you report? Depends. Are you in a state that is a state program, or are you in a state that's covered by federal? So our company, we operate in 4 states. We have Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Georgia is federal. All of our other ones are state. And how do you report to that state? Well, you've got to go to the state website and figure out how to report. I put the one in South Carolina up here because that's where we're located today. And they operate that toll-free number 24 hours a day. In North Carolina, they have 2 numbers. You have to call the OSHA North Carolina division during business hours. Non-business hours, you have to call the state capitol police and report it. So wherever you're operating, know that you have to go out to the website, that state's website, and look up and see how you're supposed to report those things. So here's some exclusions. If the fatality occurs 30 days past the incident, you don't have to report that. I don't know why. It's just the rule. Inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or loss of an eye that occurs 24 hours after the initial incident. Don't know why, but you don't have to report that. Okay. So if somebody has an incident, 24 hours passes by, and then they get on hour 25, they get put into the hospital for overnight. It's going to be a recordable, but it's not reportable. You don't have to self-report. Okay. And then any inpatient hospitalization for diagnostic testing or observation. So again, if you're put in the hospital overnight and they're just going to monitor you, that's not a reporting. Okay. You don't have to report those things. And then motor vehicle accidents, except for construction zones. If the motor vehicle accident happens in a construction zone, you have to report it. If not, you don't have to report it. Oh, also, if somebody has an incident in commercial, while they're riding in a commercial transportation, you don't have to report that as well. So airplanes, buses, things like that.
What if it's on the mining side?
Oh, so then you follow the OSHA rules. Yeah. Yeah, you follow whatever OSHA says to do. So it's basically who has jurisdiction.
Yeah.
And then, oh, there's it is, commercial or public transportation incidents. So now we're going to get into recordable. So this is what has to go in your log, okay? It has to go in these forms. And I put this little flow chart in here because it kind of helps me think about how this works. But is the injury or illness work related? This is a big one. And, you know, that's the determining factor. If it's not, then you don't have to record it. And we're going to go over some examples of that. Is the injury or illness a new case? So you handle new cases differently. If it is a new case, if it's not a new case, then you just update the old log. And there's some rules around that too, but you just go back to the most time you just go back to the old log and update it. If it did the injury or illness meet the general recording criteria, and that's where we're going to spend most of the topic today. Did it meet the recording criteria? And then if no, you don't record it. And if yes, then you record the incident. So what are the rules? You've got to keep this for 5 years. So if OSHA shows up for a visit during the initial meeting, I've never gone through one of those. Has anybody had OSHA show up to your facilities for, because you were on the list or whatever? And did you have an initial meeting?
Yeah, we had initial meeting at first, but it was a wall.
And what did they ask you for your records?
Do what?
Did they ask you for your records? Yeah, so they'll generally ask you for your records. You need to have 5 years of this. And then you also have to have a lot of times they'll ask for training records and all of those types of things. So that'll be the first thing they'll tell you. They'll show you their identification. They'll tell you why they're there. Is it a routine inspection? Is there some other reason? And then they'll start asking you to produce all these records. And you need to have 5 years of this. And also for the 5-year thing, that's how long you have to go back in. Up here where we said in 2, is it a new case? You've got 5 years for that case to stay open, basically. And so if it's not a new case, you can go back and put it on the old case. When requested, you've got to provide copies, and that is also includes to employees and their representatives, so a union or an attorney or something like that. Also, you have to, when requested by OSHA, you have to produce those. And then who must record? In this, all employers with more than 10 employees during the previous calendar year. And then all employees who are not listed on the exemption code list. Now, I think they updated that. I think the last time they updated that was, 2015. But there's a list of industries that don't have, even though you might have more than 10 employees, it's considered a lower risk industry, and you don't have to report. This is getting a little bit technical, but there's this thing in OSHA that's called an establishment or an entity. And what that means is if you have, let's say you had, well, let's take our company, for example. We do whitewater rafting, and we have lodging, and we have retail, and we have restaurants. Are any of those on that exempted list, do you think? Yes, restaurants, retail are on the exempted list. Do I have to include those on my OSHA log? Depends. So if those companies have their own set of financials, they have their own corporate structure. So they're like, let's say we put all of our restaurants under a separate LLC, then no. But if they're on that same property and all of the financials and stuff are shared, then that entity, yes. So even though we run operations that are on that excluded list, I have to include them because our main operation is on the included list. So if you're in a business where you have some things you think are included and some things you think may be excluded, dig into that a little bit more, because you really need to understand whether or not those excluded companies need to be on your OSHA log, and you'll have to probably talk to your accounting department to find out like, what the business structure is and is it financially reported the same and all this other mess. But some companies will set up, like you'll see a factory over here, and then they'll set up a separate business somewhere else that's excluded off property, and they'll have completely different financial structures. And part of it is not really done for OSHA record keeping mostly. Nobody would ever do that. Mostly it's because this other business is really high risk, and they don't want people to be able to attach to the other company. So is it work related? So again, making this point, workers' comp, OSHA, not the same, okay? And I'll give you an example of that before we get off the slide, but not the same. OSHA, since the OSHA definition, basically it was caused or contributed to the condition. So what does contributed mean? So here's a good one. If I show up to your employment and I've already been working somewhere else for a lot of my life, and I have a little bit of carpal tunnel going, and you put me on a repetitive motion job, and all of a sudden I get full-blown carpal tunnel bilaterally, is that recordable? Is that on you? You contributed to it. So you can let the doctors and insurance company and everything on the workers' comp side decide how much of it is going to hit you. But yeah, you contributed to it. So that's what it means, contributed. Significantly aggravated a pre-existing condition. Work-relatedness presumed while on the employer's premises, except, so here's some exceptions. You were present in the work environment as a member of the general public. So if, I don't know, you had a shop where you sold like hats and t-shirts and stuff like that, and somebody came by on their day off and said like, hey, I want to buy some hats for my family, then you're showing up as the general public. And if that person got injured, then that's not recordable. Results solely from a non-work related event or exposure. Voluntary participation in a wellness, medical, fitness, or recreation activity. So company picnic, if you make it voluntary, it's not, it's a little bit of a gray area. You really have to dig into it, but generally it would not be. But if anything that you can make mandatory where people have to show up, then yes, you can pretty much bet on that.
I was going to ask if you run into facilities that have gyms on premises. Yeah. Somebody's working out for the gym, is there any liability?
It's voluntary activity. Yeah. So now, if you require that everybody go through stretching in the morning, and it's not optional, and somebody gets hurt while they're stretching, then that is not voluntary. Well, then you're probably talking general liability insurance at that point. So it kind of switches probably from workers' comp to, so I said workers' comp is a different animal, right? So here's an example from workers' comp. Somebody clocks out of work. They parked off campus, they parked down the road. They're walking to their car, and they see this attractive nuisance. They see this really cool tire swing, and they go over and get on the tire swing, and they swing, and the tire swing is still on your property, but it's not on the work grounds. And they fall and hurt themselves really badly. Is that a recordable? No, they're already clocked out. They're off of their main facility where they work. Is it workers' comp? Could be. And you may want it to be workers' comp. because you have more protections under workers' comp insurance than you do under general liability. Most states have certain protections for employers under workers' comp. And so in that case, I would probably fight really hard to make that a workers' comp claim, because in workers' comp, there's a thing called egress from a work site that it could fall under. Just know that the workers' comp and the general liability stuff is over here, and then OSHA's very strict definitions sit over here.
I was gonna say, during the eclipse, how many years ago that was, for companies, require their employees to clock out.
Yeah.
If they were gonna go outside in the eclipse, and then clock back in afterwards, such that.
Yeah. Personal tasks outside of working hours. Somebody, their kid has a school project. You're going to come back in so you can use the printer, and that's in everybody's, like, the workplace is okay with that. And you're printing off stuff for the school project. That's coming in off of non-business hours. So that's not a recordable. Personal grooming, self-medication, or self-inflicted bodily damage. And there's a weird thing about that as well. And I think this is from, if you go and read the interpretations of this standard, I think it's in there. But let's say that somebody's at work, they get a piece of bad news at work that they're not going to get a very good bonus this year. They get upset and they hit the wall and they break their finger. Is that recordable? That one is. Because they heard something bad at work that triggered it. So it's a weird one. So if you are ever in a situation like that, I would dig into the law. You could call the state OSHA, and they would help you work through that to figure out. But self-inflicted is truly self-inflicted. There's no work-relatedness at all. That's what they consider self-inflicted. Motor vehicle accidents in the parking lot. So somebody's driving across the parking lot too fast, they hit another vehicle, and they get injured. If they're commuting and they haven't stepped out, and they haven't already done company business that day, so you didn't tell them, hey, can you stop and pick up, some ink cartridges on your way into work. If they've done that, then that's probably recordable. But as long as they're just commuting and they haven't gotten out of their car, but then as soon as they step out of their car, they step out and they're going to shut their door and they mess up and they catch their finger in their car door, is that recordable? Yeah, they've stepped out of their car. The car is not moving. So moving vehicle in company parking lots or on access roads, on the commute into work, not recordable. As soon as they stop the car, put it in park, pretty much everything after that is probably a recordable. And then common flu and cold. And then mental illnesses, unless the employee tells you, I have a mental illness, it has to be voluntary. Should not be asking people about that. And they have to have proof from somebody that is qualified to say that they think it's work related. So if they go see, a mental health professional, and that mental health professional says, I think this is work related, and they come in and volunteer that information, then mental illness would be included. Otherwise, it's excluded. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to keep records on it. The next step down, new or existing. New, if of course no prior incident. New, if the previous signs and symptoms had disappeared and the work environment caused a reappearance. This is where you probably want to have a really good relationship with your healthcare providers, and you want to build a good relationship with your clinic, because they can help you decide some of this stuff, because it gets kind of a little bit fuzzy. We used to do that when we ran healthcare clinics. But if all the signs pretty much go away and the doctor puts them back on full duty and then 2 months later reappears, generally that's considered a new case. And then again, if in question, just talk to your healthcare provider. They generally can help you. Recording, of course, fatalities, days away from work. So you have to count the days that the person is away from work. And I'll just go ahead and put the rest of the other one up. And you also have to count the days of restricted or light duty. Does anybody know for how long? Is there a cap? Does anybody know what the cap is? 180 days. So even if they're out for 300 days, you can cap it at 180. Days away from work, it does not include the day of the incident. Okay. So the day of the incident doesn't count. What happens if we had an employee today that got hurt really bad and we think that they're going to be out for 4 months? And we've got to turn our OSHA 300 log in at the end of the year. Does anybody know what you do?
Yes, can you project it?
Yeah, you project it, you estimate it. So again, this is where having a good relationship with your healthcare provider, you can have a consult with them and get an idea. And then you just put that down and record that. And then if it ends up being longer than that, then you can go back and do the update.
But you never more than 180 days.
Correct. And then their calendar days, they're not work days. So what if somebody works 2 days a week and they're out for 2 months? How would you calculate that? 60 days. You got to count every single day, including weekends. Why? Does anybody know why? Is it because OSHA doesn't like you and they're just evil, sadistic people? Nope.
Easier to calculate?
What it does is it gives them an idea of how bad the injury is. For their statistics in record keeping, if somebody only works 2 days a week and you only counted those 2 days, then they can't really, tell that, wow, this was an injury that lasted 2 months. And so it's really for data collection. That gives them an idea of how bad was that injury. It's not because they, just don't like you and want to make up crazy rules. Medical treatment beyond first aid. We're going to go into detail about first aid. Loss of consciousness. Somebody is at your workplace. They nick their finger. There's a little bit of blood coming out. They go over to whoever one of your first responders is for your facility. They get a Band-Aid out, and the person looks down and they see that blood, and they faint. Is that a recordable? Yes, that's a recordable because it was generated from work. If they had to cut their finger and seen the blood, they wouldn't have fainted. So technically, that's considered recordable. If somebody just faints, well, we're going to cover some scenarios in a little bit. But so loss of consciousness, doesn't matter how long. It doesn't have to be, there's no time limit. If they faint, they lose consciousness, it's recorded. And then there's a lot of other weird things that this presentation is not long enough to get into. But hearing loss, needle sticks and sharps, and then medical removal, if you're monitoring people for like heavy metals and stuff like that, then there's other recording things. If you're doing those things, then dig into the regulations and find out about those. Okay. OSHA is very literal. If it's not on these next couple of slides, it is not a first aid. Okay. Using a non-prescription medication at non-prescription strength. So, somebody goes to the doctor, or no, even better. Supervisor says like, hey, that prescription stuff that the doctor's going to give you, of Tylenol, just take 5 of them. That's the same thing. Recordable? Yes, they were directed by a supervisor to do that. That's prescription strength at that point. that is recordable. So people shouldn't be, if you have somebody at your facility that's helping with medical and first aid and stuff, they should only be doing, for over-the-counter drugs, only be telling people to take what is on the package and on the label. If the employee needs more than that, they need to go to the clinic.
That should say have prescription.
So this is a first aid criteria. So it is considered first aid if it's non-prescription and non-prescription. So it's not first aid if it's over. It's a double negative, I'm sorry. But, so
If they use a non-prescription medication at prescription strength, what is it?
then it's not first aid, it's recordable at that point. So these are just defining first aids.
If they use a non-prescription medication at prescription strength, that is recorded.
Correct. Tetanus is not, but other things are. And this is in response to an incident. So if somebody's getting hepatitis B vaccination as part of bloodborne pathogen, that of course is preventative and that's not considered recordable. But if that person doesn't already have their Hep B and they get exposed to blood and the physician that's caring for that person says, we think that you need to go ahead and start that series in response to this incident where you had this exposure, then that is recorded. Cleaning, flushing, or soaking wounds on surface of skin. This is interesting. Using wound covering such as bandages, Band-Aids, gauze pad, using butterfly bandages or stair strips. So there's new products that have come out, right? Because I've taught this. Has anybody seen Zip Stitch? It's really cool. It like goes down on both sides of the wound and it's kind of like a zip tie and it pulls the wound closed. Is that a recordable? Yeah, because it's not listed here. If it's not a butterfly or a stair strip, it's recordable. Also, don't be the employer that somebody really should have stitches and you try to close it with butterfly bandages. If somebody really needs stitches, they need to go get stitches. But butterfly bandages and stair strips are supposed to be used for, small things to keep the wound closed so that bacteria doesn't get in it. But don't be the employer that like somebody has a gaping wound and they try their best to close it up with these products.
I had a lot of customers asking about glue.
So glue, is it listed here? Is it recordable? Yeah, it is recordable. And remind me to talk about it a little bit more because, I'll go ahead and talk about it now. The skin covering that's not glue, like the Band-Aid wound covering thing, is not really like the glue. It's not trying to replace sutures, and you shouldn't be using it for that. It's really to cover the wound, to protect the wound and try to keep it together. That is not a recordable because that would be considered, under this, it would be considered wound covering. So that I think it's like Second Skin is another brand. Those types of things aren't really meant to be closing lacerations. That's not in lieu of stitches. So that would fall under a wound covering because it's really meant to protect the surface. And a lot of people use like Second Skin for blisters and things like that too, to try to keep the friction off of the skin. So that would be a wound covering. And using hot and cold therapy. If somebody goes to a physical therapist and they tell them that they're going to have a whole series of whirlpool baths, is that hot and cold therapy? Is that a first aid? No, at that point, it's not. So when they're talking about hot and cold therapy, they're really talking about applying cold to a sprain or strain. But once you get into physical therapy and somebody's prescribing those treatments, then it changes that and puts that into the category of a recordable. Also, first aid. Any non-rigid means of support, such as elastic bandages, wraps, or non-rigid back belts. Don't buy the rigid stuff and pull the rigid pieces out of it. That's kind of like walking a line, and OSHA does want you to record those things. So really use something that never had any intention of immobilizing that. Like, so if somebody hurts their wrist, just use Coban, elastic wrap, something that the intent, the reason why they made that in the first place was just supportive, and it wasn't to immobilize. Or if you can use a wrist brace as well, as long as it doesn't have a rigid stay in it. The trick is it should not have or ever had a rigid stay in it. However, temporarily immobilizing something is okay, just to transport somebody. If somebody doesn't know if their arm is broken or not, and they need to go get x-rays, do you think you should immobilize it before you transport them? Yes, because if it is broken, you don't want that body part kind of moving around. And so just to transport them to go get x-rays is fine. So transporting somebody, you can immobilize it just to go get the diagnostic work done. And then drilling a fingernail. So blood under a fingernail is pretty painful, or under a toenail. And drilling through that to relieve the pressure is not considered recordable. It is still first aid. And then using eye patches is a first aid only if that's the only thing you do to the eye. Drinking fluids for heat stress. This is going to be, do y'all have heat stress regulations in South Carolina yet? Under OSHA South Carolina? North Carolina already instituted those. This is coming. If you haven't read the heat stress stuff from OSHA, I think they're past the comment time now. I'm not sure, but this is coming. There's a whole heat illness piece that's coming from OSHA. And if you haven't read it yet, you should go out and read it. Removing foreign bodies from the eye using only irrigation or a cotton swab. Can't be embedded in the eye. Okay, if it's embedded in the eye and you're still using a cotton swab to remove it, like a plant nurse is doing that, because that is actually how you remove it, it's still recordable if it's embedded. When they're talking about removing it, it just means that it's floating on the surface and you remove it from the eye. Removing splinters, foreign material from areas other than the eye by irrigation, tweezers, cotton swabs, or other simple means. So if it's not in the eye and it's embedded and you use a simple mean to get it out, first aid only. Using finger guards and using massage. So typically massage is not counted unless it is, considered a medical treatment from a physical therapist or from a chiropractor. Big note here is this is it. It wasn't listed. Chances are it is a recordable. OSHA is very literal in this first aid, what they consider first aid. And again, if you learn first aid through like Red Cross or through American Heart Association, and there's other things in the book, doesn't matter. This is OSHA's definition. You have to go by this definition. So, see, do a little knowledge check here. Is this or is this not recordable? Cleaned, soaked, applied antiseptic, and wrapped in a bandage. Recordable, not recordable. Nope, no recordable. So, again, we're not doing anything other than first aid. Wound glue. Yeah, recordable. Butterfly bandage applied to a laceration. Not recordable. Doctor applied over-the-counter ointment on multiple follow-up visits to the clinic. No. So it doesn't matter who applied. If you take somebody to the clinic and the nurse or the doctor at the clinic only does first aid, OSHA doesn't care about what level of education, medical education that person had. They care about what the person did. So just because a doctor applied over-the-counter ointment, if it's over the counter and it's given just like it says on the label, it's not, even though a doctor applied it. So, so not recordable.
Regardless of the number of visits.
Yeah, regardless of the number of visits, they don't really care about that. What they care about is the procedure that happened. Administration of oxygen by a paramedic. Depends. So I've worked in the EMS field before, and we used to put oxygen on everybody. You show up, we put oxygen on. If it is just for, if you don't need oxygen and they just do it, then it's not. If you need oxygen, like if somebody's having an asthma attack and because of some substance that they were exposed to at work, and they've got a nebulizer on them, then absolutely that's a recordable. But if the paramedic shows up and just puts an oxygen mask on them and it doesn't really, they're just doing it to support the person, then no, it's not. So that one's a maybe. So it depends. Use of oral tool treatments for multiple visits. Depends again. Is this a prescribed thing in the treatment from like a physical therapist? And then maybe if it's just supportive, then maybe not. So this is where having that good contact with your healthcare provider is really important to understand why the treatment is there. And is it supportive or is it the actual medical treatment? Nurse drilled a fingernail to relieve fluid? Nope. Clinic gave one dose sample of prescription meds, but the employee did not take it. Absolutely recordable. It's the event. Here you go. Here's the prescription med. Once that's done, you can't take it back. It's a recordable at that point. Employee referred to the ER for a CAT scan. Yeah, it's diagnostic observation. So it's diagnostic. So that's a hard no. Now, if the CAT scan comes back and shows something, then it could be yes. But if it's clear, then that's a no. All right, a little bit tougher ones. Everybody knows this, so I won't really get into this. But once you have an incident, it's recordable. You have 7 days to get it on your 301. How many people in here use some type of software for their incident reporting? It's software for incident reporting is really great because you put it in, and if you select recordable, then it automatically generates this for you. It helps you with your statistics and everything like that too. Detailed report of employee information, 300 log, used to classify. So this is the rolled up version of that. And then your summary is what gets posted. And does everybody know when you have to post that? Yeah, February to April 30th. And so you've got to post that, and it can be hidden. It's got to be in a place where employees have access to it. And it needs to be done if you have multiple entities. It needs to be done by entity and posted for that location. All right, here's some tougher ones. Feigning laceration, employee tells supervisor that she's not feeling well, lightheaded. Supervisor asks her to go to the break room. She faints, has a 1-inch laceration. Employee goes to urgent care and receives butterfly bandages. Recordable, not recordable? Yeah, why? Fainted. Not the butterfly bandages. It was the loss of consciousness. And then we'll jump to the new information. On your incident investigation, the employee tells you, I know why I fainted. My doctor just changed my blood pressure medication. And they're trying to regulate that. And I've been fainting a lot lately. Does that change recordable versus non? Yes, it's non-work related. So if it's because of something outside of work, again, it's just butterfly bandages. That's just a first aid, even though a doctor or a nurse did it. But if it's outside of work, then that can change it to not being a reportable event. Scenario 2, contractor, temporary person is on your site and they slip on the snow. Now they have hurt ankle and lower back pain. Recordable? Depends. Medical provider takes x-rays, no fractures, gives crutches, says patient needs to stay home and rest for the remainder of the day. Recordable? No, it's the day of the incident, so not recordable. Who is this recordable to? You or the employment agency?
You supervise.
You if you supervise. So if the temporary agency has an office on your site and they're supervising the employee, then it goes on theirs. If you're supervising that temporary worker, then it goes on yours. So it all depends on who's supervising. And last one, over-the-counter medications, employee struck in the elbow with a metal bar. They complain of dull, constant pain in their right elbow. They continue to work. Employee says they had 800 milligrams of ibuprofen prescription medication left over from a previous incident that they took it. Recordable or not recordable?
No?
Nobody told them to do it. That's that self-medication thing. Now, if a supervisor had said, you need to take this much, then that would have been a recordable because they were doing it under the direction of someone else. But at that point, it's not recordable. And that is it. There's some kind of interesting things that are nuanced in there as well. And I would highly recommend that when you run into questions, have a very close relationship with, life safety, with your healthcare providers, consult them if you have any questions about is this not reportable. And then the other thing is, I would say you've got to do the recording or not recording because that's what the regulations are. That's what the standards say that you have to do. But I would encourage everybody to think beyond that and to think about, even though this isn't recordable, is it important? And do I need to have this in my data set when I'm analyzing my accidents and injuries? Because let me just give you an example of why that matters. Let's say an incident is not recordable. So it's not recordable, but let's say it's like a near miss. But now there's been 6 of them. And when you go out and you do the incident investigation, it shows that low probability of it happening, but high consequence, high severity if it does happen. What does that mean? And now you've had 6 of them.
Low probability.
Right. Something's going on. If somebody's going around a process, somebody's holding back a guard somewhere, somebody's doing something. Because it's normal operations, you're looking at it going, under normal operations, this shouldn't be happening this much. But the high severity should really trigger that, man, I need that in my data set. I need to be looking at that, even though it's not recorded. So I encourage everybody to really think about your near misses. And then the other thing is, a lot of people don't realize is that you really should be working with your insurance broker and your underwriting team as well. Because a lot of people don't realize this, but on the workers' comp side, if I spend $1 on medical, anybody know what indemnity is? So when you look at your workers' comp, you'll see a medical and you'll see indemnity. What is that thing that says indemnity? Pay, lost time, all that stuff. Restricted duty, all that stuff kind of falls under that. $1 in the same dollar on indemnity actually counts more against you in your workers' comp than the dollar in medical. So if you, for just a ballpark figure, $1 in medical is worth about $1.40 in indemnity. So it can really up your mod and really increase your premiums. And so I encourage you to like really try to partner with your insurance company and your broker and your underwriters to try to come up with some ways to really lower that indemnity through like return to work programs and in those types of things, so that you can get those numbers down. It makes a big difference in your premium.
Any other questions? Let's see.
How about reporting the issues, maybe issue?
Oh, great. So there's two ways to submit. Some people are required to submit electronically. And if you don't know if that's you, then you should look at the electronic reporting requirements under OSHA. There is a thing open for comments right now. They're talking about changing that. Usually when they put something out for comments, they pretty much decided that they're going to do it. They're just like wanting some feedback because they need to change any of the regs. But that's probably going to change who has to electronically report. But right now, I'm pretty sure it's 250 employees and over. I think the cutoff is 249. If you're 250 or over, in any one given month of the year. So if your business is cyclical, that 1 month that you went over 250, 249 in 1 month, then you should be also filing electronically. But that's changing, so go out and read those regs as well. And there's certain high hazard industries that they require that they do that as well.